Well, on one hand, we hear the critics gripe about the need for a black curtain backdrop, and I get it. I do. Don't think I don't understand that thinking. But the responsibility of the Olympia is to serve as a beacon of growth.
All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power. I've got a couple of interesting stories for you guys today. The first story that I've got for you guys today, another recent physique update from Nick Walker at a week and a half out from the 2025 Pittsburgh Pro. And again, kind of similar to the last update, posing under much better, much more flattering lighting. And I think when you see Nick pose under a lighting like this, which a lot of the other guys almost always do, and that's one of the things that I've always appreciated about Nick is a lot of his updates are taken in not that flattering lighting. And I think that's why people tend to be a little bit more critical of Nick, because I don't think he really posts updates with the intent of trying to look as impressive as possible. I think he posts updates to like provide a real benchmark of how he's looking. But when you see him under this really good lighting, I think it helps you appreciate how freaky Nick really is and how good he's actually looking. And it is kind of insane to think about the fact that we're only a week and a half out from the show. I mean, we've been talking about the Pittsburgh Pro for months now. And now, essentially, we're just days away from the show. And frankly, I think everything that we've seen from Nick in this last week or 2 weeks, all these updates, honestly, Nick looks really good. I think he looks great. And I've said this before, but I want to see Nick have a successful comeback and look as good as or better than he's ever looked. I like to see a bodybuilder in this situation where they come back from an adversity like he had with his previous coach, like he had with missing two Olympias back-to-back, like he had with a close New York Pro win in 2024, like he had with his hamstring injury. He's had all these adversities that he's had to face in his recent career. And there's nothing more exciting than when a bodybuilder is able to successfully come back from that and have a great showing. And I think you need to look no further than Derek Lunsford. I mean, what Derek did at the Arnold, and I talk about it a lot, but the reason I talk about it a lot is A, it's historic, and B, it's the exciting part about bodybuilding. Derek lost his Olympia title at the Olympia. Not only did he lose it, he slipped to third place. He also had the adversity of finding a new coach, losing Hani Rambod, one of the greatest coaches of all time, and then coming back after that Olympia loss with a new coach and beating the reigning Mr. Olympia to win the Arnold Classic title. That's huge, and that's the exciting part about bodybuilding. I mean, imagine, and this is, pure speculation, fantasy land type of stuff, but I mean, imagine if Nick were able to come into this Pittsburgh Pro and he does win the show. Imagine how exciting that would be if he was able to beat Derek after Derek just had arguably the biggest moment of his career momentum-wise, maybe outside of winning his first Olympia. So as a bodybuilding fan myself, it makes me excited to see updates like this where Nick is looking fantastic, because I think it gets us closer to that prospect of Nick potentially winning the show. Now, I'm not saying I think Nick is going to win. I still think it's Derek, but I'm saying imagine how big it would be if Nick did win. And we did get kind of a semi-update from Derek today, just a video of him training, and we are a week and a half out from the show, so it's not like a major update or anything. You can't really see much of his physique, and really I would just say the same thing about this update that I said about the last update of Derek that we talked about here. Derek looks impressively big to me, impressively full, and Derek is not typically a guy that you're talking about being a big guy going into the show. I mean, yeah, maybe you're talking about his back, maybe you're talking about his crazy V-taper, maybe you're talking about his small waist, but you're typically not describing Derek as a bigger, fuller bodybuilder or one of the biggest or fullest bodybuilders in a given lineup. So to see him looking like this going into this show, I think is heartening to see, especially when he has to face guys that are known for those attributes, like Nick, like Michael Krizo, for example, big, full, round guys. So if we see something like what we saw at the Arnold, which seemed to be a fuller, more conditioned, and more consistent Derek. And when I say consistent, I mean throughout the entire 2-day show, Derek did not fade from that level of conditioning. He stayed pretty much the same throughout the whole weekend, whereas you saw Samson fade. So if Derek is able to do that again here, really good, consistent conditioning, but he comes in bigger and fuller than the Arnold with that same or better conditioning, I think he's going to be very difficult to beat here. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Nick and Derek right now are my top two in my predictions. So of these two guys, looking at these two updates, who do you guys have winning the show or just placing higher at the Pittsburgh Pro? And speaking of the Pittsburgh Pro, we've got another massive update when it comes to the Pittsburgh Pro. There will be a guest posing, and it will be a very exciting guest posing. So that, rampant speculation that we did on this channel about the potential of there still being a guest posing turned out to lead to a logical and factual conclusion. There will be a guest posing. In addition to this insane men's open bodybuilding lineup, you're going to have 4 guys confirmed right now. I think that number will grow. I think some of the guys that are already at the show may be competing, or maybe other special guests. I think they might step on stage and also participate in this guest posing. But as far as actually confirmed, you've got Samson Dauda, Keone Pearson, Ramon Dino, and Mike Sommerfeld. So I think Samson and Keone, on one hand, is a very exciting element of this guest posing. We've heard Keone talk about, in reference to him moving to open, how one of his goals is he wants to stand next to Samson in his prime and be compared and judged next to Samson. And we get to see kind of a preview of that at this Pittsburgh Pro guest posing. So I think you're going to get a little bit of a taste of what it might look like to see Keone as an open bodybuilder, even though he hasn't fully made that transition yet, or that commitment to grow into open bodybuilding yet. He's still prepping for the 212 Olympia this year. But you're going to get to see an off-season 212 version of Keone next to an off-season open version of Samson Dauda. Both of them are current Mr. Olympia champs. That's really exciting. And then on the classic physique side, with Ramon Dino and Mike Sommerfeld, you can almost make the argument that this guest posing's intent was to have the best guy from each category right now on paper. Samson Dauda is still reigning Mr. Olympia. He's the best open bodybuilder in the world. Keone Pearson is still 212 Mr. Olympia. He's the best 212 guy in the world. Chris Bumstead is gone. So on paper, Mike Sommerfeld, runner-up at the Olympia last year. Mike Sommerfeld, winner of the Arnold Classic in Classic Physique. Mike Sommerfeld, arguably next in line to that Olympia title. You could argue that right now Mike Sommerfeld on paper is the best classic physique guy in the world. So I think that's part of the intent of this guest posing, is to have the best guy on paper from each division do this guest posing. But then also Ramon Dino, who was once next in line to that Olympia title behind Chris Bumstead, but who we did not get to see at the Arnold Classic. So we haven't seen him next to Mike Sommerfeld recently, but I don't think we've even seen him next to Mike Sommerfeld in 2025 at all. But I think this is absolutely awesome to see. I think this is a prime example of a show that has its finger on the pulse of what the fans want to see, and they're delivering that to the fans. We're going to give you an insane open bodybuilding lineup with arguably the best guys in the world. And if there's anybody better than those guys that are in that lineup actually competing as open bodybuilders, then we're going to have them here too, and they're going to do the guest posing. This is about as good as it gets. And I'm interested to see what the lighting in the backdrop is going to look like, which brings me to the next topic here. So part 2 of the interview with Dan Solomon just was released by Beyond the Stage TV. We talked about a couple clips from that interview already. Let me just roll the clip for you guys, and then we'll talk about it right after.
Well, on one hand, we hear the critics gripe about the need for a black curtain backdrop, and I get it. I do. Don't think I don't understand that thinking. But the responsibility of the Olympia is to serve as a beacon of growth. And the choices that we make, the choices that I make every single time are geared towards the growth of prize money, the growth of production value, the growth of participation, the growth of the audience. And those are the choices that we make. So with respect to the guy who wants the black curtain in the background, and I totally feel you, and this will be a great soundbite for you, because I'm sure this is going to get a lot of response because this is a hot topic, and I appreciate that. But understand that my responsibility is to grow this sport.
So obviously, this was about black backdrops. This is a very hot button topic in bodybuilding, especially relevant right now, immediately following the Detroit Pro. And on this post of this clip, there were hundreds of comments from IFBB pros, just bodybuilding fans, bodybuilding pundits, just everybody was weighing in on this topic. And I think overwhelmingly, it seemed like people were not happy with this answer that Dan Solomon gave as far as why they're not going to have a black backdrop. And I think one thing that I liked seeing the most in that comment section, because Dan said this, I thought this was kind of weird the way Dan phrased it in the clip, as he said, there's one guy that wants the black backdrops. And I don't know who he's referring to, if that was directed at me or who, but I liked seeing in the comments from pros, from fans, from other pundits just saying it's not one guy. It's the majority of fans. It's the majority of athletes that want to see a better backdrop and better lighting. And I would say this, I don't think that the expectation is that the Olympia is going to immediately shift and change everything and go from what they're doing now to just a straight up black backdrop. I think it's kind of a spectrum. Like what the Detroit Pro is doing right now, I think is on the extreme end of the spectrum. This is how we can maximize the fans voicing their opinions. This is what the fans want. This is the extreme end. I think the Olympia, what they're doing right now is on the other end of that extreme where, you know, the lasers, the LED lights, you know, these crazy LED screens where there's all kinds of graphics playing and crazy colors and just all this noise. So there's two ends of the spectrum. I don't think the expectation is that overnight the Olympia is going to become like what the Detroit Pro is. I think the expectation is that the Olympia moves more in the direction of something like that. I don't think we're saying, you know, as nice as it would be just from a pure fan standpoint to see a black backdrop at the Olympia, I don't even think that's what fans are directly asking for here. I think fans are saying, we feel that you're moving in the opposite direction from that end of the spectrum that the Detroit Pro is on. We feel like you're adding more lasers. The LED screens and the graphics are actually getting worse. And I think if you look at the video package that they show on the top of this clip, look at the Olympia screens behind the athletes, how those colors actually clash with the skin tones of the guys on stage. It distracts from them. And then, of course, the lasers, the LED lights, the smoke, all that other stuff is additional. But I think the fans are more so saying, we feel like you're doing more of that stuff that we're saying is bad for the viewing experience instead of moving in the other direction towards something like the Detroit Pro. I don't even think they're saying you have to have a black backdrop or we're not going to watch. I think they're saying improve some of these things and move more towards that. Like if you have to have an LED screen right behind the guys, you can do it in a way where it's not clashing with the physique. You can do it in a way that's complementary and makes the physique pop. I mean, the Arnold does it. A lot of people have been complimentary about the Arnold's lighting, about the Arnold setup. The Arnold doesn't use a plain black backdrop either, but you can change things if you really must have that LED screen and a big production value to sell to sponsors. And I think that was the other issue that a lot of people took with this, is people saying, look, you know, this is like Dan saying the money is more important than the fans or the athletes' opinions on how they look on stage. But I would say if you absolutely are saying you must have those screens, you must have those graphics, you must have those LEDs behind the guys, you can change things in a way where it's not crazy looking. And I think people are also saying, like, we just don't even want the lasers. We don't want the light show. We just don't even want that. But it seems like you're moving, like you're leaning into that almost more Like, the more that we're saying we don't like that, it's like there's more of it the next year. So they're moving in the opposite direction. So I think I think Dan is trying to paint this in the interview like we just immediately want this 180 switch up with the Olympia. We want black screens next year. And maybe some people do, but I think the overwhelming majority of fans and athletes are just saying, we want you to move in that direction of better lighting, a less distracting backdrop. We don't want the lasers and the light show. We don't want smoke machines. You can still have your LED screen. I would even say that. You can still have it. You don't have to be the Detroit Pro. Because I think one thing that's fair to point out here is that, like, when we look back to plain black backdrops, and one of the reasons why people started that conversation, it was something that was prevalent in the 90s and prior to the 90s as well, but up until the 90s, I would say, is when it kind of stopped. It's worth pointing out that the technology wasn't even there in the 90s to have these LED things at bodybuilding shows. So I think it's fair to say that with the Detroit Pro, for example, the proof of concept hasn't even fully been proven. That in a landscape where every bodybuilding show, or the majority of bodybuilding shows right now, which are competitors to the Detroit Pro, they have screens. I wouldn't say they all have the laser lights and all that other stuff, but they have LED screens and graphics. So in a landscape where you're competing with other shows, I don't think that it's been fully proven just off of 2 years that that is a viable competitive option financially. I mean, I have no idea how much money, if any, Fouad is making off that show, but I think it is a fair point to say it hasn't even been proven that that can be competitive with other pro shows, let alone implemented to the biggest pro show, the Mr. Olympia. Let's just, kind of dumb everything down and just make it plain. I think there needs to be some proof of concept before that conversation fully happens, as far as the Olympia moving towards a black backdrop without screens or whatever. And like the Detroit Pro, they had a screen, but it was above the athletes, so you could still see the sponsors, and it wasn't clashing with the athletes, but maybe that's not for everybody. So I felt that Dan seemed like almost bitter that fans feel this way and that fans are voicing this opinion in this clip, when I think the opinion that they need to move in the direction of a more favorable atmosphere as far as the screens, the lasers, the smoke, all that stuff. I think the fans just want that to improve. Less of the distractions, less of the noise, less of the light show, less of the crazy graphics. I think that is more what the ask from the fans really is. And I don't think the ask is as much, we want you to change everything next year and just have a black backdrop. I think they're just seeing it's moving too much in the other direction. And it seems like every time it's brought up as they're moving in that direction, it's like the fans are just shut down. We're saying, well, we're just going to keep doing this anyway because we're trying to grow the sport of bodybuilding and this is best for business. And the fans keep saying, no, we don't want this. But it feels like that's just still being pushed instead of maybe like meeting in the middle. I think that is more the ask. Like I said, the Detroit Pro is on one extreme end of what the fans want. The Olympia right now is on the other extreme end. And I think there's a compromise that can be made here to satisfy everybody, just meeting in the middle. But it seems like that's not a conversation they're willing to have based on the tone of this clip. And like I said, I even saw pro bodybuilders in the comments of that post where Dan said, it's just critics that are saying this about the backdrop. And I saw pros commenting, no, it's not just critics. We want to look better on stage too. We want better lighting. We want a better backdrop. So when we have pictures or videos of us on the Olympia stage, we want to look better. We don't like the way we looked before. We want this to change too. It's not critics, it's your athletes as well. And I think when addressing these things, tone is very important. And I think the reason why, like if you read through the comments on this post, I think the reason why there was such a visceral response in the comment section from fans, athletes, critics, pundits, everybody, I think the reason for that is because the tone of Dan addressing this backdrop situation seemed very dismissive of what a lot of people are saying and feeling about that particular topic. It felt very dismissive. It felt like Look, I'm a businessman. I understand growing a business. You guys don't. This is why I'm going to continue to not listen to what you guys are saying. I hear you, but I'm not going to listen because I'm trying to actually grow a business here. And this isn't necessarily new either. I heard Dan address this. I believe it was last year's Olympia. There was like some kind of speech that he gave before the Olympia, and he addressed the lighting, the backdrop thing as well. And I would say, like, just even to give a very fair example here, let's take the winner, Samson Dauda. When he walks out, let's take a picture. So we're not even talking about the lasers that are moving, the graphics that are moving behind him. We're not talking about the smoke, any of that stuff. Look at the very first picture of Samson Dauda when he comes out and hits that first front lat spread, or front relax rather, I'm sorry. And just even removing all the criticism about all that other stuff, just look at the background. How that background clashes with Samson Dauda's physique, his skin tone. How it doesn't make Samson stand out. It distracts from his physique. You're looking at that backdrop. And keep in mind, this is a still image. That background is actually moving behind him. And in addition to that, the lights around the stage are moving and strobing. In some cases, there's smoke. In some cases, there's lasers. But in this picture, just looking at the backdrop, it doesn't have to be plain black. But look at how it clashes with Samson's physique in just this one picture, the first pose he hits when he first walks out. I think this is an example of a small change that fans would like to see made. A backdrop that does not clash as much with the physique. If you want to keep your LED screens, keep a lot of this stuff. I'm saying I think the ask is meet us in the middle and make some of these things look better. And again, I think an example of that meeting in the middle is if you look at the Arnold Classic this year. Same thing, very first pose when Samson walks out on stage. There's a big difference between these two pictures and these two backgrounds. And again, the Arnold does not have a plain black backdrop. So this is like an example of if you want to have a big production, a big show, look at how the background is not distracting from Samson, and even the way they have the arch placed, that golden arch of the Arnold Classic logo. It's placed in a way that it almost singles out the athlete's physique. It kind of wraps around them to make them like the focal point of a photo or a video. And then the screens in the background are soft. They're not big distracting colors. It's just different. And I think this is an example of a compromise. If you want to have a big show with a big production value and still keep those screens, there's changes that can be made. And obviously the Arnold didn't have smoke and lasers. And like I've said before, I really think that I think it's obvious at this point, right? There's definitely a rivalry between the Arnold and the Olympia, or at least between Dan and Brian from the Arnold, whether or not they're going to admit it. I think it's pretty obvious at this point. I watched that full interview of Dan. He took a lot of shots at Arnold himself and the Arnold Classic. Brian has taken shots at Dan and the Olympia and vice versa. But I really do think this is healthy for the sport of bodybuilding to have two top shows now that are in contention. You know, people are arguing the Arnold is as big as the Olympia now. But I think that competition, with there not just being one big show that's saying, okay, we're just going to do whatever we want because we're the biggest, we're the best, we don't have to listen to any feedback. I think the fact that there's now a real competition between the two, pushing both shows to be better and to listen to the fan feedback more, I think that's great for the sport of bodybuilding. So when you talk about, I want to grow the sport, that's why we're not going to change the backdrops, I think this competition between those two shows is what's going to grow the sport the most. We've already seen it happen with the prize money, and now we're seeing this conversation about the lighting and the backdrop. I think you will see a change at this year's Mr. Olympia for the better with the backdrop and the lighting, or at least I hope so. And I think that will have been forced by the fan conversation and the comparison to the Arnold. I mean, let's keep it real. Which do you prefer here? If you look at the videos side by side, Samson Dauda at the Arnold, Samson Dauda at the Olympia, which one, let's take away our opinions on what we like to see. Which one do you think makes Samson look better? Which one do you think Samson looks at and says, I look great in this one. I'd rather post this. I'd rather have this video. I'm not going to answer the question for you. What do you think in the comments below? Now, next up in the news, also from this Dan Solomon interview. I know there's a lot of Dan Solomon. Again, shout out to Beyond the Stage TV. Really solid interview. I highly recommend watching the whole thing. That's why we're just talking about a couple, 10, 30-second clips here. It's a lot longer than 10 or 30 seconds. But here's what he said about Kai Greene competing at the Masters Olympia, or rather, not competing because he's not going to pay Kai to show up.
And Kai's doing great, and I have so much respect for Kai. But we're not paying anybody to compete in the show. You can't do it, and I'm going to explain why. Because the minute you do that, you're creating a competitive imbalance. And by that, I mean, if another athlete in the lineup got wind that he was competing against, he or she were competing against somebody who was paid to be in that show, right? All of a sudden, it creates an economic dynamic, right? Where people would then question the outcome of the show. So it creates a...
So you know what? I actually do agree with this. I can see a scenario where you would pay somebody to show up to a bodybuilding show. I could see a scenario where that's justified. But in the case of Kai Greene, the fact that Kai said, at least this is what Dan's responding to in this clip, the fact that Kai said he would only do the Masters Olympia if they paid him to show up. I think it's actually right for Dan to draw a line in the sand and say, you know what, no. We're not going to pay you. If you show up and compete. If you don't, we don't care. Because I think at this point, with Kai Greene, almost every single year, teasing us with this idea of him coming back, I think that on top of that, for him to say, I'm only going to come back if you pay me to come back and compete in the Masters Olympia, I think at that point, it's just like throwing it back in our faces and saying, I'm not going to do this for the fans. Even though I've teased them for a decade about coming back, I'm not going to do it for them. I would only do it for the money. And I think in that scenario, I agree with Dan. I think drawing a line in the sand here is good. On the other hand, not specifically pertaining to Kai Greene, I feel like I could see the argument for paying somebody to show up to compete at a show. Because bodybuilding is a bit of a weird sport. And it's individual based. But I look at it from the perspective of, if boxers can have a guaranteed purse, whether they win or lose, to show up to a fight because that boxer or that fighter is a big draw for that promotion and they want them to fight, so they guarantee them money, whether they win or not, to show up. And I think you can draw a parallel to that. You can draw parallels to team sports. I think like the NFL draft the other day. Paying millions of dollars to get a big star on your team because it's beneficial to your team, I think you can draw a parallel to, we want you at our bodybuilding show because you're a big star. Can we pay you to come compete? Now, I think Dan is also right that opens the door to, well, if you paid him to come show up, that leads to fans would be questioning the judging. Okay, did you rig it for this guy? If you paid him to show up, where does it stop? So I can see the argument against it as well. But I think when it comes to a Masters show, for example, like this Masters Olympia, keep in mind, they brought it back in 2023. They didn't have it in 2024. I think the reason for that is because the interest was very, very low. I think the viewership was very low. So I think it is a worthy discussion to say, for a show like that, we need some interest in our show. Can we pay somebody, a big name, to show up? Does that clash with the ethics of bodybuilding? Because there's so many parallels in other sports where either someone is paid to be on a team, someone is guaranteed money, whether they win or lose, things like that. I feel like it is an interesting discussion to have when it comes to bodybuilding. Especially in a landscape like this year, you're seeing a lot of shows, well, I guess I shouldn't say a lot, but you're seeing a few shows that previously had open bodybuilding as a division in their pro competition. But because of lackluster turnout, I mean, we saw, how many shows have we seen, over the past 3 or 4 years, random open pro shows that had 4, 5, or 6 guys total competing in open bodybuilding. And because basically nobody cared, nobody watched it, the viewership, the interest was low, they removed open bodybuilding from their competition. So like in a scenario like that, is it against like the ethics of bodybuilding to say, we'll give a guy like, let's not say, we'll give a guy like Martin Fitzwater 20 grand to show up and compete, win or lose, or Nick Walker or something, so that our show is more competitive, it has more star power, more people want to watch it, and then we're not going bankrupt next year and we don't have to cancel out the division. I don't know. I think it's an interesting discussion, but I think as it pertains to this Kai Greene scenario, I think Dan is making the right call. But I do think, it's a never say never type of thing. I don't think it's something that could never happen in bodybuilding or something that should never happen in bodybuilding. I think it's I think it's an interesting topic for sure. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below about those two Dan Solomon stories. I think they're really interesting, hot button topics in bodybuilding right now, and I think the conversation surrounding it has been really productive, and I think it's really interesting to see all the varying opinions on these topics. But let's end it on a positive note, not a controversial story. The latest update from Sas Heirati, who has also confirmed he's competing in the New York Pro. Again, I think this New York Pro is an under-talked about lineup because we don't have the full lineup yet, but I think all this excitement for Pittsburgh has kind of overshadowed the fact that the New York Pro is the following week. And I think you are going to see a pretty significant amount of star power in that New York Pro lineup, maybe as much, if not the same, as the Pittsburgh Pro. I mean, we've already heard Derek say he might do Pittsburgh. Sas looks incredible and has probably been one of the more talked about and impressive bodybuilders of 2025 so far, beating Andrew Jacked at the prejudging of the last show that he did, and then almost, that close decision with William Bonac in the Detroit Pro. Sas is this guy that brings this crazy conditioning to, it seems like, every show he's done so far this year. So in my opinion, that's already one big name that's not doing Pittsburgh that is doing New York. But I think if you look at like the totality of Pittsburgh and how Derek said he might do New York, and I think he probably will if he wins Pittsburgh easily, but then also the fact that Nick still needs to qualify for the Olympia. If Nick does not win Pittsburgh, I would almost guarantee he goes to New York because he also won last year's New York Pro. So Nick technically is still the New York Pro champ, so it would be like he's defending his title. I think he'll also go to New York. Krizo and Bonac have already confirmed they're going to New York. I'm not so sure about Martin. I think if Martin doesn't win Pittsburgh, I don't know if he does New York because he is already qualified for the Olympia this year. I don't know if he just goes back to the drawing board if he loses in Pittsburgh. I don't know, but most likely maybe he does just go ahead and do New York because I think pretty much everybody else is going to anyway. So that's kind of the cool thing about what we have to look forward to in this immediate future in May is obviously the Pittsburgh Pro is going to be insane. But I think there's a 95% chance that we're basically going to get to run it completely back the next week and get that same lineup, if not better, all over again in New York. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, click that bell notification icon if you have not already. And as always, I love you guys, appreciate you guys. Nick Strength and Power signing out. All right, guys, don't forget to click that like button and subscribe to this channel if you enjoy the content. Also, check out my Instagram at Nick Strength Power. My Facebook page, which is simply Nick Strength and Power. My secondary YouTube channel, Nick Strength and Vlogs, for vlogs and bonus content that you will not see on this channel. And consider subscribing to my third YouTube channel, Nick Strength and Pokemon, which is all things Pokemon and trading card games, completely unrelated to this channel. So if you're into that, give that one a look. And all links to merchandise and social media will be in the description box below. If you guys want a Nick Strength and Power t-shirt, that will be in the Shopify link below. Have a great day.